What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN recaps. We want to do these every couple weeks, just to keep the upload schedule a little bit different. Obviously, we love doing our lives, but we want to show a little love to the video section of the
Mm.
SSPN channel, Ethan. So today, we're going to be breaking down a couple different games. We're going to be breaking down 4 games in total. We will be recapping the Spurs' past 2 games against the Portland Trailblazers and the Minnesota Timberwolves this past Sunday. And then we will be previewing the Spurs game tomorrow against the Atlanta Hawks, and then once again against the Portland Trailblazers next Saturday. Then we'll be into Christmas week, so we won't see you guys until Thursday after that. But obviously, some games coming up there as well that we're excited for. The Spurs finally getting a Christmas Day game, Ethan. I'm really excited for that. We'll see how it goes because it is a tough matchup against the New York Knicks, but glad to see that the Spurs are back on Christmas Day, Ethan. I feel like that's a good sign.
Oh yeah, everyone knows Christmas is really when the NBA season starts for the average fan. And if you have a game on Christmas Day, odds are you either have a really good team or are just an exciting team. I think we fit more into that exciting
Yeah.
category with Wemby, but it still means a lot to the fan base because it feels like it's been probably since the 2016 Spurs played the
Hmm.
Warriors, Jude. Or 2016-17 Spurs played the Warriors was the last time we actually had one. So it's great to be back into the prestige of the league.
And that was the Zaza year, if I remember correctly, right?
You are correct, yes, sir.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I couldn't remember if that was 2018 or 2017, but there you go, right on the money.
Mm.
But Ethan, as there kind of has been a lull in the NBA season with these past 2 weeks with the in-season tournament going on. Shout out to the Milwaukee Bucks beating the
Mm.
Oklahoma City Thunder on
Darvin
Tuesday
Ham,
night.
undefeated, baby,
Darvin Ham and Turian Prince,
never lost.
undefeated, never lost. But with that, there's been a little bit of a break in the regular
Mm.
season schedule, and kind of throughout that, there's been a little bit of a lull with the Spurs whenever it comes to new takes or new opinions because kind of over the past couple weeks it's been the same thing. We've predicted the Spurs were going to go 1-1 against a team that was close to the bottom of the Western Conference, and then they play somebody else like the Minnesota Timberwolves this past Sunday. And the last time we talked, they got a win against the New Orleans Pelicans, but before that, got some butt whoopings from teams like the Kings, and they lose to the teams that are
Mhm.
much more competitive, much more experienced, and are beating the teams at the bottom of the Western Conference. And as much as that may be frustrating with some of the wins we got earlier in the season, like the win against the Oklahoma City Thunder, not to bring that up every episode, but that was a big win for the Spurs, especially with Victor out in that game. We were kind of playing above our head, beating some teams that, just bluntly are going to be better than us this season.
Mm.
We're coming back down to earth a little bit, but still coming back down to earth doesn't mean that we're going through what we've gone through the past 2 seasons, Ethan.
Yeah.
And I think, I was thinking about this before we came on this episode. The Spurs are 13-13 right now. If you would have asked me, what's the Spurs record 26 games into the season, I think I probably would have said around like 11-15 or 10 and
Mhm.
16, something in that range. So as much as there's still things the Spurs need to work on, there's still things that they can improve on. Obviously, that was going to be the case coming into this season, even with potential improvements being made. I'm still happy that the Spurs are at 500 in that play-in contention. And anytime that you feel bad about the Spurs, just think about where they would be in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'd actually be playoff contention at
Yeah.
the record that we are at in the Eastern Conference. Well said, Jude. I think without a doubt they are surpassing my expectations in a lot of ways, and I think some of these losses that are a little frustrating, like you said, to more competitive teams, while they are expected from the realistic fan at this point in the Spurs development, I think the margin in which we're losing is actually closer than these games are actually finishing because all year we've kind of been riddled with injuries in a variety of ways and multiple starting lineups, multiple bench rotations, and the consistency among minutes, plus the loss of Coach Pop. I mean, he's obviously alive. The absence of Coach Pop
Yeah.
from the coaching staff, uh,
Loss of Coach Pop from the bench.
from the bench, that can't be. As much as Mitch Johnson's doing a great job, that also has an effect on the Spurs overall. But at 13-13 is still above my expectations, which is great. We're seeing improvements in a lot of ways. Um, but it isn't perfect. But this is better than I expected, Jude.
Yeah, and I mean the way that you got to look at it too, you're not going to go from 22 and 60 to 60 and 22.
No.
If we look at the Oklahoma City Thunder, they went 22 and 60, then they had a fringe play-in team, they made the 10 seed, and then after that, last season is when they had their big breakout year. Not saying that's exactly what's going to happen with the Spurs, but you're even seeing it a little bit with the Rockets too, man. They were in that same situation last year. Before that, they had a couple rough years. Now they're kind of breaking out a little bit. Even though they didn't get it done in Vegas, they still advanced, far in the in-season tournament. Right now, they have a really good record near the top of the Western Conference. I forget exactly what it is off the top of my head. I think the last time I saw it, it was 17-8, if I remember correctly. But those are two examples of young teams that have kind of had to build through. And this year again, we weren't going to just jump into the top 5 in the West, as much as that's where we all want to be because we grew up on that as Spurs fans, and we know the potential that this team has with what we've seen from Stephon Castle, and of course the exponential potential of Victor Wembanyama. There were going to be those type of struggles this year, regardless. But the other thing that you talked about that I think you hit the nail on the head is the other thing that's key context with these losses is the injuries. The rotations have been muffled in a lot of these games. It's not to make complete excuses because there still have been some similar themes weaved throughout these games that have been negatives for the Spurs, regardless of who's on the court. But still, I mean, like, for example, we're about to get into this Portland Trailblazers game. This game would not have been as close if we had a fully healthy roster.
No, for sure. But at the same time, we shot ourselves in the foot in that third quarter with defensive lapses, as well as you can't predict that Jeremy Grant's going to be as hot as he was in that third quarter either. But it shouldn't have been a 2-point win either way.
Right. Absolutely. The Spurs should not have had to come back and win by 10 in the fourth quarter to get the dub in that one. The Spurs, really were dominant in that first half. I know the second quarter was a little bit closer, with the Spurs only winning that quarter by 2 points. Won the first quarter 33-25, but for the most part, the Spurs were really up by around 10 the majority of that first half. Yes, there were some things maybe that you would have liked to see them pull away with, but again, I give them a little bit of a mulligan when we're, playing consistent minutes with Mamu, as much as we love Mamu. Consistent minutes. I mean, Blake Wesley got 25 minutes in this game. Not to say he played bad. He actually played really well. But 15 minutes from Malachi Branham, no Keldon Johnson, no Stephon Castle. I mean, that kind of, and no Zach Collins as well. Although I will say, Charles Bassey, that we've been calling for him to play more, of course. But with the injury report in this game, if you have those two guys, all things considered, I was very happy with the first half that they played that way without those two guys, to word that correctly. But like you said, we can't, we still, this is the sign of a young team. You can't just come out and be like, okay, we were able to kind of not even play with our full intensity, not our full lineup. And we were able to kind of just hold them to a 10-point deficit throughout the first half. It seemed like they kind of came out of the third quarter as, oh, we can just do the same thing. And, we're going to beat these guys. And the third quarter, the Portland Trailblazers almost beat us by 20, 46-28. So again, like you said, really the key takeaway in this game for me, Ethan, is stay locked in regardless of who you're playing.
Exactly. And that's been a constant negative for this team going back to last year, is playing 4 quarters consistently. And I don't think that means 110% energy the entire 4 quarters, but you can't just be giving up backdoor cuts, easy layups, wide open shots to Jeremy Grant, Anthony Simons, when they're clearly feeling themselves in that third quarter. And 20, like you said, 20 points, giving up 46 points in a quarter is just absurd.
It's almost 50
for any team. Yeah, that is outrageous, especially when they had 25 and 17 in the first half. But I think, like you said, Blake Wesley, Mamu. I knew Mamu was minus 15 in the box score. He didn't score, but I still felt like he played a decent game. He had 5 boards and he was pushing the pace as that kind of stretch 4, maybe sometimes 5 on the bench unit. Love Charles in his physicality. He also had 4 rebounds, 8 points, always an energy player. But Blake was exceptional. 8 points, 8 assists, and only 1 turnover. And he had a lot of minutes where he was the primary facilitator off that bench, hence the 8 assists. But it helps when Devin Vassell also has 23 points But a lot of those actually came in the fourth quarter when it took
Yes.
a valiant effort from the entire team. Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, Julian Champagny, they all deserve shout outs because they were all huge to secure that fourth quarter comeback.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, hone in when you look at Devin's points. If you don't have the context of this game, you'll be like, oh, this was a really solid game from Devin. And not to say that it was a bad game overall, but like you said, the majority of his points were kind of scored in that fourth quarter. And with the other guys that we had out, we needed him to carry to get the win. And I believe we were even texting about that when this
It
game
was
was going
huge.
on. So love to see that, especially considering the circumstances and just that as much as, like the first Utah game that Devin came back, he played really well, shot really well, scored 20 points, was efficient, looked like normal Dev, but there's still some, there's the minutes. Well, he got 30 minutes in this one. So I don't know what's going to happen with him in the starting lineup. Um, that's a whole nother conversation that we can get into. And speaking of lineups as well, I think you can throw Blake Wesley in there with his
Mhm.
play during Trey Jones's absence. But again, that's a whole nother discussion. The point that I'm getting at is that Devin Vassell has had some ups and downs since he's came back off of injury. This was really good to see. This was a vintage performance that reminded us of what we saw last year and why we felt like he was the second best player on the team coming into this season.
For sure. And what was most exciting for me, Jude, it's like I know Victor had a lot of clutch baskets in the fourth quarter, hit a couple key free throws to secure the win, actually. But Devin Vassell down the stretch was the guy we gave the ball to in isolation to hit that crazy right shoulder fadeaway. I think was that to tie the game or to take the lead. I can't remember
I can't
exactly
remember
which,
either.
but it was a huge basket, and I was shocked that Victor didn't get that opportunity because he was cooking
Yeah.
prior to that. But the team and the coaching staff decided to put their trust in Devin, and he came through big time, which is crazy considering the lackluster first half that he had.
Yeah, absolutely. And this just kind of ties into something that I've been harping on since really last year. Whenever it comes to Devin, him at his best, he can be a 25-5 guy. I know he's a little bit more on those numbers, but still 23 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. This is a Devin Vassell stat line when he's playing at his best. At its finest, in my opinion. Want to give another big shout out to Julian Champagny. Like you said,
Yes.
a lot of these stats were kind of in the fourth quarter, but man, I mean, Julian has been exceeding my expectations all year. I see
Mhm.
why we're keeping him in the starting lineup, and I wouldn't have thought that preseason.
Dude, he is the fourth leading scorer on this team, averaging 12.8 points per game and 5 rebounds. On, let me see what his shooting splits are. Because I'm pretty
Was
sure he's shooting over 40% from three.
was
No,
50
I'm wrong.
Okay, go ahead.
35% from three. It feels like it's improving though in the last few games. He has seemingly found his confidence. He went 5 for 10 in this game, and they were all like we were behind. Like
Mhm.
these were massive threes, momentum threes. And I think he hit 3 in that fourth quarter alone. Jude. So, I mean, he's hitting big shots at big moments. He's able to put the ball on the floor. Plays really solid defense. He's not Danny Green level defensively
Right.
yet, but offensively, I might go out on a limb and say he's like at least at that level of like 2014, 15, 16 Danny Green. He's at least at that bar, if not higher. Because I know Danny wasn't asked to put the ball on the floor like ever, but Julian is doing
Yeah.
this and it's starting to become consistent with a 6'8", 6'9" frame.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties into the rebounding point that you made when you were mentioning that. I thought about his height. That was the first thing I thought about. Um, the timeliness of the threes, like you mentioned, I mean, showing some clutch genes and not just this game, but others throughout the season. But kind of as I was saying, when you were pulling up the percentages, 50% from the field overall, 50% from three in this game. This is just one game, but I completely agree with you. Over the past couple weeks, it feels like those percentages, would be plus 40%. And maybe some of the numbers are a little bit down, just a little bit, because we give him the freedom to take as many shots. I think I've seen
Mhm.
like some 5 for 12 stat lines, before for him whenever it comes to his 3-point shooting. But still, I mean, it like you said, I really don't think that's outrageous to make that Danny Green comparison, man, because it just feels like it's really starting to come together for him playing off the ball as a catch and shoot guy whenever it and we already knew that like that was going to be Julian's potential, right?
Mhm.
But now we're starting to see the consistency build, and that's something really promising for a 22-year-old player.
A 22-year-old dude that's making $3 million a year with a team option in 26, 27.
Yeah,
I mean, he's toward the bottom. We got Malachi making more than him, Trey,
that's
Zach
crazy to think about.
Collins. Yeah, and not to put Keldon on blast because I think Keldon
Right.
has his positives and negatives, but he's averaging more points and more and equal rebounds to Keldon Johnson right now. And I know he's starting, and it's a completely different role. But if we decide to elevate Devin into that starting 3 spot next to Stefan, and move Julian to the bench, if his production continues at this level off the bench, we're gonna have to start having some real conversations about Mr. Johnson because he's making how
20
much money?
million or
20 million.
a little bit less than that, I think, because it goes down. So it might
You're-
be like 18 or 16.
He's making 19 million this year, but it's 17.5 next year and the year after,
Okay.
compared to Julian making 3. So these conversations are gonna have to be had, Jude.
And if anybody's watched this channel for an extended period of time, you know that we've been like the biggest Keldon Johnson defenders, if
Love
you
him.
will. Like, and there's a lot of things that he's getting paid for that it's off the court locker room stuff, which is very
Mhm.
crucial for the Spurs, right? On the top type of guys that you want to bring in, and you want to have that energy in the locker room. And there's stuff that he brings. I mean, we even saw it. If we want to go back to the Team USA stuff, say what you want about Keldon, but literally everybody on the Olympic team like loved Keldon. You know what I mean? Whether it was KD or whoever.
Right.
So, we definitely are aware and value Keldon's value. With all of that being said, stark contrast, when you compare him to Julian Champagny, at least when it comes to the monetary value. Like that is really a good example if you want to use a comparative example of like to show the value that Julian Champagny is bringing to this team. I mean, and the value of his contract as well. And so for all the people that, are critical of Brian Wright and all that stuff, Julian Champagny is just, Brian Wright's iteration of the Spurs finding an undrafted guy that is a diamond in the rough that turns into a consistent role player for us and maybe a consistent starter for us moving forward.
You never know. Time will tell.
Time will tell. Trying to think if I have any other takeaways from this game. Do want to give a little shout out to Jeremy. Had 2 steals and a block. Just really a typical Jeremy game. Didn't try to do too much. And was able to, fill up the box score, do cleanup duty, put up 15 points. Again, kind of like you said, Ethan. Really the guys who were carrying the torch, if you will, were Champagny, Victor Wembanyama, and Devin Vassell in the fourth quarter. But Jeremy Sohan did have some contributions that were crucial to the win. And another thing that I noticed here, Ethan, as much as it wasn't the craziest game from Harrison Barnes, still got up to double digits and it led to a win. So that trend that we were talking about last time still rings true, even in this one.
Well, not to spoil the next game, but it does get broken in the Timberwolves game.
Ah,
He had 17 in a big loss.
okay.
Um, but one last note about Jeremy Sohan: when we were out without a point guard in that fourth quarter for us. Oh wait, am I thinking about the right game? Yeah, I am. He
Yeah.
he played point guard in the fourth quarter for a little while against the Blazers. He played well, Jude. He played well. The handle looked better. He took it coast to coast for a dunk. Made a couple nice passes. So while it was ugly last year, the experiment, this is exactly what it was for.
Exactly.
For moments and key moments, he's able to comfortably take the ball up the floor and make plays for himself and for others. It's not as horrific when he's not, or it's better to look at when he's not doing it for 30 minutes a night.
That was very much you got to see the forest through the trees type
Mhm.
thing. I understand why people were frustrated. I mean, it was
It was hard to watch.
it was bad. There's no other way to say it. Even Jeremy admitted it was bad in the press conferences, essentially. Um, but like you said, the point last year, as much as we want to win for Victor, was to get him another key piece in Stephon Castle, mission accomplished. And that point guard experiment for moments like this, when Stephon Castle's injured, Keldon's injured, because we do see Keldon bring the ball up the floor off the bench from time to time. Not saying he's playing a full point guard role, but I'm just saying 2 key ball handlers out. And we kind of laid off the Malachi Branham minutes. And here's something I haven't even mentioned in this game. Can't believe this. Chris Paul got ejected.
That's what I
So
was saying.
that was the other giant part of this game. When I was talking about even the beginning of this game with the way everybody played, that's another reason why I was proud of at least the first half, because you lost Chris Paul in this game as well. So a very big guard deficit. You were essentially playing with Blake. I mean, Blake Wesley got 25 minutes. We don't need to rehash everything we've already said, but the Chris Paul ejection was key and adds to a lot of the points that we already mentioned.
Most definitely.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. So the Spurs get a win, move to 13-12 against the Portland Trailblazers. That is what Ethan and I thought was going to happen the last time we were here. Not to toot our own horn, you can go check. We've been wrong about games before. We'll tell you when we are.
Look, all the time.
Right, exactly. But in these two games, we actually were both right, Ethan, because we did predict that the Spurs would fall to the Minnesota Timberwolves, which they did. The Spurs did have a much better third quarter in this game, which is, other than the last game that we talked about, that has been a theme for the Spurs. They've won a lot of third quarters. But even with that little mini run to make it a game, at the end of the day, Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves were just a little bit too much for the Spurs, winning 106-92.
Yeah, I think Anthony Edwards was a big part of this win for them with 26 points, 5 boards, 2 assists. But we knew he was going to take it personally when we beat them last time. But Jude, this comes down to 2 stats for me, and I couldn't watch the game live. For full disclosure, I had to watch highlights and read about it and look at stats. But 34% from 3 from Minnesota compared to our 24%, and 18 turnovers for the Spurs compared to their 12. To me, that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah, it was a rough offensive game, and the Timberwolves were kind of having to gel a little bit because they brought it. They made the big trade with Cat and stuff like that. But this game was definitely reminiscent of the defense that we saw from them last year.
For sure.
Other than the third quarter against the Spurs, they held the Spurs under 20 points in the first 2 quarters and to just 22 points in the fourth. Yes, the Spurs did make their run out of the third quarter, but at the end of the day, they were able to make adjustments off of that and get the job done. Like you said, Anthony Edwards was really kind of taking control of this game. 17 points off the bench for Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well, with 2 steals. And also had basically the rest of their starting lineup, except for Mike Conley, all gotten double digits as well with some contributions. And like you mentioned, as much as they didn't shoot the greatest either from 3, it was still 10% better than we did. 3 for 12 from Julian Champagnie, 4 for 14 overall. We were talking about the percentages last game. Those are some percentages that could down the numbers, by a couple points. I'd be curious to see what it was before this game, even though it may have only been like a 1 or 2% increase, but still that'll hurt your shooting percentage. Like you said, Harrison Barnes, unfortunately, the streak was broken, but a rough night shooting for Victor as well. So you got to give credit to Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, all those guys, the team defense of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he only went to the line 3 times as well. So they were really able to keep him contained overall. 1 for 7 from 3 from Wemby. And here's another thing. 2 for 11, 0 for 6 from Devin Vassell. A really rough night for him overall. Definitely, I mean, there's no other way to put it. His worst game of the season. And also, even though we got Stephon Castle back, you could argue this was one of his worst games of the season as well at 1 for 8, 0 for 3. He did get 5 assists. But when Devin Vassell is minus 30 and Stephon Castle is minus 23, and shoot, and when Harrison Barnes is minus 15, even though I don't completely agree with that one, that is not a good recipe for the Spurs to get a win.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's only a couple positives I can take away from this game. Blake Wesley in 9 minutes had 4 points, 5 assists, 1 turnover. Love to see that continue
Yeah.
progression. Charles Bassey, 8 points, 7 boards, 4 of 5 from the field. But I think that Devin point that you made, that's just inexcusable. I didn't watch the game, so I don't know how great the scheming was against him, but 2 for 11, that's not in minus 30 in the box score. That's not what we need from a guy that's going to give us 25 and 5 like we think he's going to
Right.
eventually.
Yeah, and I mean, he is a guy who is on a $20 million contract at this
Right.
point as well. So that's another standard that, he's going to hold himself. I think he would tell us this was a really bad game for him. He's got to bounce back tomorrow when they play the Hawks.
For
Not to
sure.
jump into that game, but, I think he would even hold himself accountable here.
Most definitely. And just for context for everybody listening, this was also the first game Jeremy Sohan moved from the bench to the starting unit. So Devin wasn't playing with him as often. Keldon Johnson is injured.
Yep.
Trey Jones is injured. Zach Collins, even though he's not been great this year, he's also not playing. So there were a lot of difficult, and then Stefan Castle integrating into the bench unit as well. So there were a lot of differences in that bench rotation that could have contributed to this as well. But still, we got to hold him to a little bit higher of a standard just because of the money that he's making and the ceiling that we think he's capable of.
Yeah. And, if you've watched this channel, I'm not saying that the plus minus is everything, but in this example, in this
Minus
game,
30. Yeah.
Devin Vassell and Stefan Castle, that does kind of tell the story for the most part. The only person I really want to give a shout out to is our homeboy, Jeremy Sohan,
Yeah, 15
17,
boards.
15, 4 assists, 2 steals, and a block. That's 3 straight
Mhm.
games with 3 stocks. Or excuse me, 2 straight games with 3 stocks. Yeah, he was really the main bright spot on the box score and when watching the game.
Do you remember the first time he played Julius Randle and he just got absolutely cooked?
Yeah,
And then we both made the point where we're like, I don't think this is going to happen again. Well, since then, Jeremy Sohan has had Julius Randle's number, and I don't
yeah,
know if it's just exclusively Jeremy Sohan, but he hasn't given us a lot of issues since that first game, and I think a lot of it does have to do with his individual defense.
yeah, absolutely. There's really not too much else to break down in this game. The Spurs did not shoot well. Their best players specifically did not shoot well. Only really Jeremy Sohan and Harrison Barnes shot well. I do want to give them some sort of credit because the way that they played in the third quarter did make it a single digit game, at least
Right.
going into the fourth. And the fourth was still a little bit more competitive, you could say. I know it's the point differential is similar to the other two quarters that they lost in the first and second. Um, but still made a little bit of a run there to at least make it interesting in the fourth. So I want to give them credit there. But really, this was just the Minnesota Timberwolves defense winning this game, in my opinion.
Agreed.
We will now move on to who we got coming up, Ethan. So, again, another lull this week in the NBA schedule because of the NBA Cup, but basketball returns tomorrow night, and so does Spurs basketball playing the Atlanta Hawks, Ethan. Hey, this is a game we really want to win because if we beat the Atlanta Hawks, that's one loss more that increases their draft pick odds there. Now, obviously, seems like the Atlanta Hawks are not going to be in the top of the draft lottery like we may have hoped for. But still, any win against them still helps our draft odds, even if it's just one game. So we want to try to take advantage of that. We essentially have the same record as them. And here's an interesting thing when you look at the injury report. Trae Young is a game time decision. I feel like he'll probably play if I had to guess, but that is something to monitor. If he doesn't play, obviously that would be a huge opportunity for the Spurs and a game that they probably should win if that's the case, as much as the Atlanta Hawks still do have some depth on this team. And we've kind of seen the restructuring of their roster moving off of DeJounte Murray. It seems like that is a little bit better just for the structure of their team, the flow of their offense, what Quinn Snyder is trying to do out there. But yeah, my main thing when I look at this game, honestly, is Trae Young, but also Trey Jones is a game time decision. Zach Collins is a game time decision. And Keldon Johnson is a game time decision. And as much as those guys, you can have criticisms for them, as you pointed out in that last game, Ethan, still, Devin was kind of out there with a lot of people that he doesn't have chemistry with. You could say we're kind of building it a little bit with Charles, but other than that, these are kind of the 3 guys that he's played with, not just in that bench rotation, but also for the majority of his career. So if those guys play, or 2 out of 3 of those guys play, that will be something to watch as well. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting injury report stuff in this game. I think at the end of the day, we just got to shoot better than we did in that Minnesota Timberwolves game. I know that is a simple way to put it, but I also think it's true.
Yeah, this is a game that the Spurs honestly should win, in my opinion. I think we have the talent. I don't think they have anybody that can slow down Wemby. I am worried about one guy though, and it's not Trey Young because he's kind of been in a slump and he's given the Spurs trouble in the past, but he's not the guy that immediately comes to mind. For me, it's DeAndre Hunter, who's been averaging 19 off the bench, shooting 44% from three. And our bench sometimes does give us energy offensively, but defensively, there are lapses, especially at that wing position.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm fearful that he's going to catch fire and ruin what should be an easy win for the Spurs.
I'm going to be interested to see what the rotations look like because if Stephon Castle is still coming off the bench because he's coming off of his injury,
Mhm.
that may only be a one game thing. But if he's coming off the bench, that is someone who I know he's a little bit shorter than DeAndre Hunter, but because there's still, it's kind of up in the air for Keldon's status. And as much as I think Keldon's on ball defense, we've seen some flashes of improvement this year. I think I would still much rather have Stephon Castle on DeAndre Hunter than Keldon
Mhm.
Johnson. So if he's still coming off the bench, I definitely want to put Stephon on DeAndre Hunter. Like you said, I've been seeing that as well. It feels like DeAndre Hunter is becoming the player that it always seemed like he was going to be when you used him in 2K. I
Right.
hate to put it that way, but seriously, like like he's like green lights in 2K. I don't even have 2K this year, but over the past years when I bought it, like that's somebody that I've always picked up, in the trade finder. Enough 2K talk. The point is, DeAndre Hunter is having a really good season off the bench, and I think that was a really good point. And who guards him is definitely a question mark for us.
For sure. And my other question that I just realized, Dyson Daniels, who is he going to be defending? Because if it's
Mm,
Chris Paul, we might have a problem. And if it's Devin Vassell, we might have a problem again because he is elite. And I think he's leading the league in steals right now. So he has a really high
yeah.
probability of disrupting any pick and roll offense that we might want to run with an older, small Chris Paul and a Devin Vassell who's coming off of a rough game.
Dyson Daniels is a super intelligent defender. He can read passing lanes.
Mhm.
And it seems like a lot of times when he's out there, he knows what the offense is doing, before the rest of his teammates and is able to survey that and read it, kind of like I was saying. And that ties into, once again, that New Orleans trade that they made. It's yes, they're not at the top of the East, but I think they're moving in a better direction than they would have been now, or than they would have been prior with the roster that they have structured now. But again, that kind of brings me back to the injuries as well, Ethan, because if he is on a Devin Vassell and say he's able to slow him down a little bit, this would be an opportunity where Keldon can come in and give us 15 points. So that's where I watch the injury report. Not saying for sure, but this is kind of the storyline that you were talking about there. That's kind of the position where sometimes Keldon can break out and, have a 20-point game. And I believe he's done that against the Hawks in the past. Granted, that was last year. And I know he always tries to play hard against DeJounte because of the relationship that they had. But still, he's had success against Atlanta before with 20-point games. I believe there was a TNT game last year in the spring. Again, I can't remember exactly when that was, but I'm pretty sure it was in the second half of the season where Keldon went off. It was like a midday game, too. It was weird.
Hmm.
And Keldon went off for 20 plus points to kind of lead us to a victory there. Not 100% banking on that, but I think the point you made about Dyson Daniels is big. He can shut down some of our better offensive scorers. And a lot of the times that's when it's not just Keldon, but even like a Jeremy Sohan or a Harrison Barnes, a Champagny as well. Those are guys who need to step up.
For me, it's going to come down to Victor. If he can get 30 plus points, I think the Spurs win. If he doesn't, it might be tough.
Yeah. I think that's very fair. And when I was talking about all those other guys, that's of course with the assumption in the background
The
that
assumption that
Victor
he's going to get you
that
25,
Victor
12, and
Victor is going to
12.
be Victor. Yeah, I'm not
Right.
really too worried about Victor. I mean, even in the game that we just saw where he didn't play his best, he still got us like 20 and 12.
Right.
So I have no worries for Victor. But the rest of the team, especially in regards to the injury report, I think will be crucial with all of the points that you made there because the Hawks do have more depth and they also are a little bit more free flowing and open overall as a team with their transition play and half court offense because of the trade they made.
Right. And do you have any more points about the Hawks? Because I have one last thing that I'm just going to kind of give a teaser for. We can talk about it at a later date, Jude. I know we're kind
Okay.
of wrapping up this episode, but Blake Wesley's played 21 games, 12 minutes a game. Trey Jones has only played 8 because of injury at 17 a game. And Trey Jones has a way better assist turnover ratio, way better. It's 5-2. Uh, but everything else is pretty much even. Blake Wesley's probably playing with a little bit better pace. I think everybody would agree that he's a better defender. He's younger. He's got more upside.
He's faster.
faster, we're going to have to start having a conversation, and we'll give Trey a little bit more sample size because he's, again, only eight games, so maybe he can turn it around a little bit. Uh, but we're going to have to start talking about that as well. When you bring in the Julian versus Keldon conversation, you're going to have to start
Exactly.
talking about Trey and Blake as well.
I completely agree. That's kind of what we were alluding to a little bit earlier in some of our other conversations. But that was the last thing that I was going to say also is with Trey Jones. If he isn't able to go in this one, because I believe his original return date was like December 27th.
Mm,
So this seems like a little bit earlier. But with that being said, I would say probably out of those three guys, he has the highest chance to not play. That's another thing that would be key in this game. If he doesn't play, Blake Wesley's performance is something that we would have to keep an eye on as well. But just that aside, whenever it comes to the context of this Hawks game, to hit on what you were touching on, if he keeps performing the way that he has, just around like an 8-8 game from Blake Wesley,
big.
that's really not too different from a Trey Jones stat line. Is the other thing. The only difference is the other points that we talked about. It's not to crap on Trey. Trey's a quality backup point guard. But there are some traits that Blake Wesley has that Trey Jones doesn't.
I don't think that's outrageous to say, my friend.
Yeah, so that is definitely something I'm keeping an eye on as well. I think you hit the nail on the head. If we're going to talk about Keldon versus Julian, we got to talk about Trey versus Blake, just like we're talking about Zach versus Charles as well. Kind
Mhm.
of all these guys, I mean, I think Keldon's a little bit more secure, even if I don't want to go too crazy, but
Mhm.
there's trade value with Keldon. Not to go too far down the rabbit hole there, but just even aside from the trade talk, I think his spot is a little bit
Yeah.
more secure just because you can also move him to the four and stuff like that.
I was gonna say
Um,
you can play him and Julian together. You can't play the other guys together, really.
exactly. But still, that's kind of the point though, with all of these guys. It's going to be something to watch and kind of why the injury report is something to keep an eye on here.
Right on.
We do have one more game to go over here before we wrap this one up, Ethan. Before we get to next week, where we'll recap all of that stuff. But this Saturday, we will be back in Portland. Of course, I do this every time, Ethan. I click on the team instead of the time, which is where the actual game is. So obviously, all of their injuries, other than Matisse Thybulle, there's a potential that DeAndre Ayton could be back. I don't know if we've played him yet in the matchups that
Mhm.
we've faced them. I don't think that
Don't think
we,
so.
yeah, I didn't think so either. So that could be something to watch there. Honestly, there's really not too much to break down in this one either. It's not because we don't want to give you content. It's just because we kind of already talked about the past Portland Trailblazers game. I think if we're at full strength, I mean, you got the two scores right in front of us. When the
Mhm.
Spurs were at full strength, they won by 13. When they weren't, they won by 2. Yes, there was the third quarter in that second game that we played. We didn't play our best, but I hate to simplify it that way, but I really think that's what it comes down to.
No, I think it has to be a double-digit victory, just to prove to everybody that that third quarter was an anomaly and not a lapse in execution and focus. Plus, we're at home, and we just
Yeah.
always play better at home.
And that's another thing. Yeah, that was on the road, that second game, and the first game we played them was at home as well. So, will be interesting to see how maybe DeAndre Ayton could affect that game just because we haven't seen him yet. But still, I'm with you. I think the Spurs need to, shoot for that goal and shoot for holding themselves to a standard and getting the double-digit win at home against the Trailblazers, who are 3-11 on the road.
Hmm. Signs point toward a Spurs win, my friend.
We shall see. But that is going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. We appreciate all of y'all hanging out with us. We will see you guys after Christmas. We hope you have happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that stuff. Thank you guys for the support on the channel. Go Spurs, go. Tell us your thoughts on these upcoming games, what you think is going to happen in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the channel, turn the notification bell on, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch you on the next one. Go Spurs, go.